You ever notice how the people who look the calmest are usually the ones carrying the heaviest storms? The thunder rolled low across the Dallas sky like a warning no one wanted to hear. Rain hammered the private runway in crooked silver lines, bouncing off the polished wings of a Gulfstream G650 parked beneath the floodlights. $40 million of metal and status sat motionless on the soaked tarmac, while a cluster of executives argued beneath black umbrellas near the stairway. Inside the terminal hangar, phones buzzed. Voices overlapped. Somebody cursed under their breath. Somewhere in the distance, another crack of thunder rattled the glass walls hard enough to make a receptionist flinch. Marcus Hale barely looked up. He kept wiping grease from his hands with an old shop rag darkened by years of engine oil and midnight shifts. His denim work jacket hung damp across his shoulders, rainwater dripping slowly from the brim of his cap onto the concrete floor below. Around him, younger mechanics rushed from one side of the hangar to the other, chasing paperwork and shouting numbers nobody seemed to trust anymore. But Marcus stayed still, quiet, watching the aircraft. The left turbine whined again, a strange sound. Too sharp, too uneven. Marcus narrowed his eyes toward the jet. "That turbine's choking," he muttered softly. Nobody heard him at first. Then the engine coughed. A burst of orange sparks spit from the intake for half a second before vanishing into the rain. Every conversation stopped. One mechanic froze mid-step. Another slowly lowered his flashlight. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds, long enough to feel expensive. "Pressure bleed," Marcus said calmly, almost to himself. "Compressors struggling." A tall engineer in a white raincoat turned toward him with visible irritation. "You got something to add, hangar boy?" Marcus shrugged once. "Just saying what I hear." The engineer scoffed loudly. "And I'm guessing now you're an aviation expert too?" Before Marcus could answer, the glass doors of the terminal slid open behind them. Evelyn Carter stepped out into the storm like she owned the weather itself. Black heels, cream-colored coat, phone pressed to one ear. Every person near the runway straightened immediately. Even in the rain, she looked untouchable. The billionaire CEO of Carter Aerodyne rarely repeated herself, and tonight her patience had already burned through hours ago. "I don't care what the FAA says," she snapped into the phone while walking toward the jet. "I need wheels up in 20 minutes. Her heels clicked hard against the wet pavement. Sharp, precise, angry. Then she noticed the crowd standing around the aircraft instead of fixing it. Her eyes narrowed. "Why is my plane still here?" Nobody answered fast enough. The engineer quickly pointed toward Marcus without thinking. "He says the turbine's failing." Evelyn finally looked at him, really looked at him. A tall black man in a faded mechanic jacket standing beneath the rain, with grease on his knuckles and calm in his eyes. Not nervous, not apologizing. Just standing there like he belonged beside a machine worth more than most neighborhoods. Her gaze sharpened slightly. "You diagnosed a Rolls-Royce BR 725 engine from 30 feet away?" she asked coldly. Marcus folded the rag into his back pocket. "Closer to 20. A few nervous laughs escaped from the crew. Evelyn didn't laugh, neither did Marcus. Rainwater rolled down the side of the jet behind them, while thunder groaned somewhere above the clouds again. Then the turbine sputtered one more time. Louder now. Rougher. The smile disappeared from the engineer's face. Marcus glanced back toward the aircraft slowly. "You might want to ground her," he said quietly. "Storm's not the dangerous part tonight. The rain came harder after that. Thick Texas rain, the kind that swallowed runway lights and turned every reflection on the pavement into liquid silver." Nobody moved for a moment after Marcus spoke. The turbine let out another uneven whine, low and strained, before the system automatically powered down with a hollow mechanical click. Somewhere behind the jet, a baggage cart rolled past slowly, its headlights cutting through the storm like tired eyes. Evelyn Carter stood perfectly still beneath her umbrella, while the wind pulled strands of blonde hair loose around her face. Her jaw tightened. "How long?" she asked sharply without taking her eyes off the aircraft. The lead engineer swallowed. "We are checking the diagnostics now." "That is not what I asked." Her voice stayed calm. But calm from Evelyn Carter sounded more dangerous than shouting. The engineer hesitated. "Could be 40 minutes. Maybe an hour." Evelyn laughed once under her breath. Not because it was funny, because rich people often laughed when things stopped obeying them. "I have board members waiting in Manhattan at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning," she said. That deal closes tonight or 300 jobs disappear by Monday. Nobody answered. Marcus quietly picked up his toolbox from the wet concrete floor. He started walking back toward the maintenance bay like the conversation had nothing to do with him. Hey, the engineer barked suddenly. You seem to know a lot for somebody changing oil filters. Marcus stopped but did not turn around immediately. Rain tapped softly against the metal roof above them. Engines talk, he said. Most people just do not listen long enough. A younger mechanic snorted. What is that supposed to mean? Marcus finally looked back over one shoulder. Means the plane warned you before it failed. The younger mechanic rolled his eyes dramatically. Man, listen to this guy. Another chuckle spread through the crew. Somebody whispered, Hangar philosopher. Evelyn crossed her arms slowly. So what exactly are your qualifications? She asked coldly. Marcus met her gaze without arrogance. Without fear either. I keep planes running. That was not my question. A beat of silence passed between them, while thunder rumbled far above the clouds. Marcus glanced briefly toward the aircraft. Used to fly them too. That got a bigger laugh. One of the pilots standing near the stairs shook his head openly. Sure you did, another muttered. Everybody used to be something. Marcus did not react. That seemed to irritate them more than if he had argued back. Evelyn studied him carefully now. The old bomber jacket beneath his work coat, the faded Air Force patch stitched near the shoulder, the grease on his hands, the calm in his posture. Something about him did not fit together neatly, and people like Evelyn noticed details for a living. Still, pressure had already eaten through the last layer of her patience tonight. Wonderful, she said dryly. So now my mechanic thinks he is Maverick. A few people laughed louder this time. Marcus only gave a small shrug. No, ma'am, he said quietly. Maverick breaks rules. I like bringing people home. The line landed strangely in the silence afterward. Too honest to sound clever, too calm to sound defensive. Evelyn looked away first. Her phone buzzed again. She answered immediately and paced toward the runway while speaking in clipped, frustrated sentences about delays, investors, and weather windows closing over the East Coast. Marcus watched the storm instead. The wind shifted direction slightly. He could smell jet fuel mixing with rainwater and hot metal. Then one of the dispatchers came sprinting across the tarmac holding a tablet above his head. We have a problem, he shouted over the storm. Captain Reynolds is grounded in Denver. Severe weather. He cannot get here until morning. Silence spread across the runway again. Different this time. Heavier. Evelyn slowly lowered her phone from her ear. You are telling me my pilot is stuck 2 states away? The dispatcher nodded nervously. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Evelyn looked toward Marcus again. A tired smile touched the corner of her mouth, sharp as broken glass. What next? She asked. You going to fly it too? The wind howled across the runway hard enough to shake the loose chains hanging near the maintenance bay. Somewhere above the storm clouds, lightning flashed white for half a second, turning every puddle on the tarmac into broken mirrors. Marcus looked at Evelyn for a long moment after her question. Not offended, not amused either, just tired in a way that did not come from tonight. If somebody signs the clearance, he said calmly. The crew burst into laughter again. One pilot leaned against the stair rail, grinning openly now. This is getting good, another shook his head. Man probably plays flight simulator at home. Marcus ignored them completely. He bent down beside his toolbox and calmly zipped it shut while rain hammered the runway roof overhead. Evelyn watched him carefully. Most men tried too hard around powerful women, especially rich ones. They puffed themselves up, smiled too much, talked too loud. Marcus Hale did none of that. That bothered her more than confidence would have. You seriously expect me to hand over a $40 million aircraft to a mechanic? She asked. Marcus stood again slowly. No, ma'am, he replied. I expect you to do whatever gets your people home safe. The sentence landed differently than the others. The laughter faded faster this time. Safety was not glamorous. It was not corporate language. It was something older, realer. Evelyn crossed her arms tighter against the cold wind. And you can do that? Marcus glanced toward the jet. Rainwater slid down the polished body of the aircraft in silver streams beneath the floodlights. I can try, one of the executives nearby scoffed loudly. This is insane, another whispered. Legal would have a stroke. The engineer stepped closer to Evelyn and lowered his voice. though not enough. Miss Carter, we cannot let some maintenance guy touch that cockpit. Marcus quietly looked away toward the dark runway lights stretching into the storm. He had heard versions of that sentence his whole life. Some maintenance guy, some driver, some janitor, some black man people assume belong somewhere behind the curtain instead of near responsibility. Evelyn studied him again. Really studied him now. The old bomber jacket beneath his coat was worn thin at the elbows. His boots were cracked from years of concrete floors and jet fuel stains. But his posture never bent under any of it. He stood there like a man who had already survived things harder than humiliation. You have a license? She asked finally. Marcus nodded once. Expired civilian certification. Military credentials still archived with the Air Force. The younger pilot laughed under his breath. Archived. Listen to him. Evelyn held out her hands sharply toward the dispatcher. Check. The dispatcher blinked. Ma'am? I said check. He hurried off through the rain with the tablet clutched to his chest. The storm kept groaning overhead while everybody waited in tense silence. Somewhere nearby, an airport siren echoed faintly in the distance. Marcus did not move. Evelyn noticed that too. No nervous shifting, no desperate speeches, just stillness. A dangerous kind of calm. Then the dispatcher came running back several minutes later, breathing hard. He is legit, he said. Marcus Hale, Air Force Reserve pilot. Cargo Transport Division. 8 years active reserve status. Flight commendation in Afghanistan. 2-7. The pilot near the stairs straightened immediately. The engineer stopped smiling. Even the rain suddenly sounded quieter somehow. Evelyn looked at Marcus differently now, though she hated that she did. And now you work night maintenance? She asked. Marcus shrugged lightly. Night shifts work better when you have a kid at home. The answer caught her off guard. Simple. Honest. No self-pity attached to it, just fact. Thunder rolled again. Louder now. The dispatcher looked nervously toward the runway. Weather window is closing fast. Evelyn slowly looked from the storm to the aircraft and back to Marcus Hale standing beneath the floodlights, with rain dripping from the edge of his cap. Then, with a bitter smile that sounded more exhausted than cruel, she said, Fine. If you can actually fly that plane through this storm and get me to New York alive, I swear I will marry you myself. The crew laughed again, but thinner this time. Less certain. Marcus looked at her for 2 quiet seconds. Then he picked up his flight bag from the floor beside the toolbox. I am going to need coffee first, he said. For a second, nobody knew whether Marcus Hale was joking. The storm roared across the runway, while rain bounced off the jet in silver bursts beneath the airport floodlights. Then Marcus calmly walked past the frozen crew toward the maintenance building without waiting for permission from anyone. Where is he going? One executive whispered. The younger pilot laughed nervously, probably to pack his lunch. But Evelyn did not laugh this time. She watched Marcus disappear through the hangar doors with the same strange feeling she got whenever something stopped fitting neatly into the world she understood. Men like him were supposed to explain themselves, defend themselves, impress people. Marcus just moved with purpose and silence, and somehow that unsettled her more. 10 minutes later, he came back out wearing a dark brown bomber jacket faded from years of use. The old Air Force patch near the shoulder looked almost gray now beneath the rain. He carried a worn leather flight bag in one hand and a steaming paper cup of black coffee in the other. No drama, no speeches, just a man walking through the storm like he had already made peace with it years ago. The crew fell quiet watching him approach the aircraft. Even the jokes stopped. Marcus handed the coffee cup to the dispatcher beside the stairs. Hold this for me. You are really doing this? The dispatcher asked carefully. Marcus glanced toward the sky. Storm cells are moving east faster now. We still have maybe 30 minutes before visibility drops too low. The dispatcher blinked. How do you know that? Marcus shrugged lightly. The wind changed. Evelyn stood near the base of the stairway with her arms folded tightly against the cold. Rainwater slid from the ends of her hair onto the collar of her coat, but she barely noticed anymore. You seem very calm for someone about to fly a jet after years away from a cockpit, she said. Marcus stopped in front of her. Not close enough to invade her space, just close enough for her to see the exhaustion in his eyes beneath the runway lights. Flying is easy, he replied quietly. It is landing life afterward that gets complicated. Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten unexpectedly. Before she could answer, the engineer stepped forward holding a stack of forms. Miss Carter, this waiver needs your signature. Evelyn took the papers without looking away from Marcus. If this goes wrong, the engineer warned softly, insurance will bury us alive, Marcus answered before Evelyn could. Then do not let it go wrong. The engineer frowned. That is not how aviation works. Marcus looked toward the aircraft again. Actually, that is exactly how aviation works. Silence settled over the group after that. Rain hammered the runway louder now. Somewhere behind them, another aircraft taxied slowly through the storm, with glowing amber lights cutting across the darkness. Evelyn finally signed the papers with one sharp stroke of her pen. Congratulations, she said dryly, while handing the forms back. You are officially the worst decision I have made this year. Marcus gave the faintest smile. Small. Tired. Real. That is a pretty competitive category, I imagine. One of the flight attendants nearby accidentally laughed before quickly covering her mouth. Evelyn stared at Marcus for a second longer than she meant to. Then she stepped aside and motioned toward the stairs. Get us to New York, Mr. Hale. Marcus nodded once and climbed the stairway into the aircraft while thunder rolled across the sky above them. Inside the cabin, the lights glowed warm against polished wood and cream leather seats. Expensive silence filled the air. Marcus paused for half a second near the cockpit entrance, resting one hand against the frame. His expression changed slightly then, softer somehow. Like a man hearing an old song he thought life had taken away from him. He ran his fingers lightly across the controls once before sitting down in the captain's seat. Outside the windshield, rain streaked endlessly across the glass, while runway lights stretched into the dark like distant stars. Marcus adjusted the headset slowly, calmly, like he had never really left. The cabin lights dimmed automatically as the jet began taxiing across the rain-soaked runway. Outside the windows, the storm blurred the world into streaks of gray and silver. Inside, nobody spoke much anymore. The earlier laughter had disappeared somewhere between the paperwork and the sound of Marcus Hale's voice over the intercom. Calm voices changed rooms. People forgot that sometimes. Evelyn sat alone in the cream leather seat near the front of the cabin, with her tablet open on her lap, though she had not read a single word in 10 minutes. Numbers filled the screen. Merger reports. Investor messages. Deadlines stacked like bricks against her chest. Usually work sharpened her focus. Tonight it only made her aware of the turbulence already waiting beyond the glass. One of the flight attendants walked carefully down the aisle, checking seatbelts twice. Her nervous smile looked thinner now. Expected rough air after takeoff, she said softly. Captain Hale says to remain seated. Captain Hale. The words sounded strange in the silence. Evelyn leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes briefly. Somewhere beyond the cockpit door, she could hear Marcus speaking with air traffic control. Steady, unhurried, no ego in his voice, just precision. Carter 7-2 requesting departure clearance. Rain hammered the fuselage harder. The aircraft paused near the runway threshold, while lightning flashed across the clouds ahead. Then came the engine surge, deep, powerful, the kind of sound you felt in your ribs before your ears caught up. The jet accelerated hard through the storm. Water sprayed behind the wheels in silver sheets while runway lights streaked past, faster and faster outside the windows. One executive muttered a prayer under his breath. Another gripped the armrest so tightly, his knuckles turned pale. Evelyn stared forward at the dark cabin ceiling while the aircraft pushed through heavy crosswinds. Then the turbulence hit, sharp enough to rattle glasses inside the galley. A woman near the rear gasped loudly. Somewhere overhead, a storage compartment clicked open before a flight attendant rushed to secure it. The aircraft tilted slightly left against the wind. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her seatbelt instinctively. Another violent pocket of air dropped the jet several feet in one sudden motion. A frightened cry escaped from one of the assistants seated across the aisle. Everybody breathe, Marcus said over the intercom, his voice low and grounded beneath the sound of rain striking the aircraft. Storms always sound worse than they are. The cabin quieted almost immediately after that. Not because the turbulence stopped, because his calm reached people before logic did. Evelyn hated that she noticed it, hated even more that she felt safer because of it. Another wave of turbulence shook the cabin, this time harder. Her coffee cup slid sideways across the tray table before she caught it quickly. Without warning, a hand appeared beside her seat, holding a folded white cloth napkin. Marcus had stepped briefly out of the cockpit during autopilot stabilization. For the coffee, he said simply. Evelyn looked up at him, really up at him for the first time tonight, without irritation clouding the view. The warm cabin lights softened the hard lines of his face. Exhaustion sat behind his eyes, but not fear. Never fear. You left the cockpit? She asked quietly. Autopilot steady for 30 seconds. He nodded toward the trembling executive across the aisle. Besides, your finance guy looked one bump away from meeting God personally. Against her own will, Evelyn let out the smallest laugh. Short, real. Marcus noticed but did not comment on it. He simply turned back toward the cockpit. Then another violent shake hit the aircraft. Strong enough this time for the overhead lights to flicker once. Several passengers gasped loudly, but Marcus never rushed, never raised his voice. He just steadied himself against the cabin wall and looked toward the storm ahead through the cockpit door window. Calm and chaos looked different when it was genuine. Evelyn realized that now, most powerful people controlled rooms by making others nervous. Marcus controlled fear by refusing to feed it. The difference settled somewhere deep in her chest before she could stop it. The storm finally loosened its grip somewhere over Tennessee. Not completely, just enough for the cabin lights to stop flickering and for people to unclench their shoulders without realizing it. Rain still traced thin silver lines across the windows, but the violent shaking had softened into occasional tremors beneath the aircraft. Most of the passengers had gone quiet now. Exhaustion replaced panic faster than comfort ever could. One executive slept awkwardly with his tie loosened and his mouth slightly open. Another stared blankly at spreadsheets glowing on a laptop screen he clearly was not reading anymore. Evelyn Carter remained awake. She sat near the front of the cabin with one heel resting against the base of her seat, fingers loosely wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold nearly an hour earlier. Across the aisle, the folded white napkin Marcus had handed her still rested beside the tray table. For some reason, she had not moved it. The cockpit door opened softly. Marcus stepped out carrying another cup of black coffee, moving quietly through the dim cabin while most people slept. The overhead lights painted soft amber shadows across his face now, and without the tension of the storm around him, he looked older somehow, not weak, just worn by years that had clearly asked too much from him. Evelyn watched him pour fresh coffee into a paper cup near the galley counter. I thought pilots were supposed to avoid caffeine, she said quietly. Marcus glanced over his shoulder. That rule disappears around hour 12. She checked the diamond watch on her wrist automatically. It was nearly 2 in the morning Eastern time. How long have you been awake? She asked. Since yesterday, he said it casually while stirring sugar into the coffee. Like exhaustion had become normal enough not to mention anymore. Evelyn studied him for a second. And you are still this calm? Marcus leaned lightly against the counter. Calm is cheaper than panic. Another small silence settled between them, softer than before. The kind silence creates when people stop trying to win conversations. Evelyn looked toward the cockpit door. You really flew cargo planes in the Air Force? Marcus nodded once. Mostly medical transport. That sounds important, he shrugged lightly. Mostly sounded loud. She almost smiled at that, almost. Then her eyes drifted toward the open cockpit where faint instrument lights glowed blue against the darkness. Something caught her attention near the captain's seat. A photograph taped carefully beside the control panel. Small, slightly worn at the edges. She stood slowly and stepped closer without thinking. In the picture, a young black boy with a missing front tooth grinned proudly while holding a homemade model airplane painted bright red. Marcus noticed where she was looking. His expression changed immediately. Softer now. Protective in a quiet way. That your son? Evelyn asked. Marcus nodded. Noah. Even saying the name seemed to warm the air around him. Evelyn looked at the photo again. How old? 8. She traced the edge of the cockpit doorway lightly with one finger. He likes airplanes? Marcus gave the faintest smile. Real this time. Likes asking questions about them more than airplanes themselves. What kind of questions? Marcus looked out through the windshield where clouds drifted beneath the moonlight now. Stuff adults, stop asking, he smiled faintly to himself. Like whether clouds ever get lonely? Evelyn stared at him for a second after that. People in her world did not say things like that anymore. They talked in contracts, percentages, strategy decks. Nobody talked about lonely clouds. Why did you stop flying? She asked quietly. The question hung between them for several seconds before Marcus answered. Noah's mother passed away when he was 3. His voice stayed calm, but quieter now. After that, somebody had to stay close to the ground. Evelyn felt something tighten unexpectedly inside her chest. Marcus looked back toward the cockpit windows, where the storm now glowed faintly hundreds of miles behind them. "The sky is beautiful," he said softly. "But kids should not have to grow up waving goodbye to it all the time." Evelyn opened her mouth slightly, then stopped. For the first time in years, words failed her completely. New York appeared beneath the clouds just before dawn. A sea of pale orange lights stretched endlessly beneath the aircraft, while the first hints of morning softened the horizon beyond Manhattan. The storm was gone here. Only scattered clouds drifted below the wings now, glowing silver in the early light. Inside the cabin, passengers slowly woke one by one as the jet began its descent. The tension that had wrapped itself around everyone hours earlier had faded into exhaustion and disbelief. One executive loosened his collar and looked around as if surprised to still be alive. Another quietly laughed under his breath after checking the weather updates on his phone. The flight attendant nearest the galley wiped her eyes quickly before anyone noticed. Marcus Hale guided the aircraft downward with the same calm he had shown all night. No dramatic announcements, no swagger, just quiet professionalism wrapped in steady hands and a tired voice. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Evelyn sat motionless near the window, watching the skyline grow larger through the pale blue dawn. Usually arriving in New York felt like entering battle. Deals, cameras. The wheels touched the runway with a smoothness that made several passengers glance at each other in surprise. No hard bounce, no applause, just the low roar of reverse thrust and the soft vibration of rubber meeting pavement after nearly 3 hours in the sky. Marcus taxied the jet calmly toward the private terminal, while the first rays of sunlight spilled across the runway. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice came softly over the intercom, "welcome to New York." That was it. No performance attached to it. Somehow that made it feel more meaningful. Outside the terminal, a line of black SUVs already waited beneath the glowing security lights. Board members, assistants, drivers, people in expensive coats, checking expensive watches. Evelyn could see them gathering before the aircraft even stopped moving completely, her world waiting impatiently for her return. The cabin door opened with a hiss. Cold morning air drifted inside, carrying the scent of rain-soaked pavement and city concrete. One of the executives stood immediately and adjusted his suit jacket. "Miss Carter, the investors are all downstairs already." Evelyn nodded absently, but her attention shifted toward the cockpit instead. Marcus stepped out carrying the same worn leather flight bag from Dallas. No entourage, no congratulations. Just a tired father ready to disappear back into ordinary life before sunrise. Several executives stared openly at him now with the uncomfortable expression people wore when they realized they had judged someone too quickly. The younger pilot from Dallas avoided eye contact completely. Marcus walked quietly down the aisle toward the exit, while passengers stepped aside without thinking. Respect moved differently when it was earned, instead of demanded. As he reached the aircraft door, Evelyn noticed the old zipper on his flight bag had split partially open. Papers and tools pressed awkwardly against the opening. Without really thinking about it, she reached down and lifted the bag carefully before it slipped from his shoulder. The entire cabin froze. One executive actually stopped mid-sentence. Another stared openly. People like Evelyn Carter did not carry bags for mechanics, especially not in front of witnesses. Marcus looked back at her with visible surprise. "I got it," he said quietly. Evelyn handed the strap back to him, but not before noticing the stitched name faded along the side of the bag. "Captain Marcus Hale." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "You flew through a thunderstorm on 3 hours of sleep," she replied softly. "Let me carry the bag for 2 seconds." The silence after that felt enormous. Marcus studied her face carefully then. Not like a billionaire, not like a CEO, just a woman standing beneath fluorescent cabin lights, looking more tired than powerful for the first time all night. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, small enough most people would have missed it. "Careful," he said quietly while taking the bag back. "People might think you are becoming nice." For the first time in years, Evelyn Carter laughed without calculating how it sounded. The private terminal slowly emptied as dawn spread across the city in pale shades of blue and gold. Executives disappeared into waiting SUVs while assistants rushed through glass doors balancing phones, coffee trays, and impossible schedules. New York was waking up, fast, loud, hungry. But near the edge of the terminal runway, Marcus Hale stood quietly beside the aircraft stairs, looking up at the brightening sky like a man trying to remember something important before life interrupted him again. His bomber jacket hung loosely over one shoulder now, and exhaustion settled visibly into the lines around his eyes. He looked less like a pilot again, and more like what the world expected him to be. A tired maintenance worker carrying an old flight bag through another long morning. Evelyn Carter noticed that too. Strange how quickly people became invisible again once the crisis ended. 1 hour ago, everyone on that plane trusted him with their lives. Now half of them walked past without even saying goodbye. Marcus did not seem bothered by it, maybe because he was used to it. He checked his phone briefly near the hangar entrance. A small smile touched his face almost immediately, softer than anything Evelyn had seen all night. "Your son?" she asked while stepping beside him. Marcus nodded once. "He sends me voice messages every morning before school. At this hour, Noah thinks 6:30 is late." Evelyn glanced toward the phone screen where a tiny audio notification glowed beside a cartoon airplane icon. Something unexpectedly warm moved through her chest again. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket carefully, like the message weighed something precious. "You should probably get some sleep," Evelyn said quietly. Marcus looked toward the line of black SUVs waiting near the curb. "You should probably conquer Wall Street." That earned another small laugh from her before she could stop it. The morning air between them felt strangely easy now. Not romantic, not dramatic, just human. And somehow that felt rarer. A cold wind swept across the runway, carrying the smell of jet fuel and rain-soaked concrete. Marcus adjusted the strap of his bag. "Well," he said softly, "looks like everybody survived the storm after all." Evelyn studied him for a second longer than necessary. The fluorescent lights from the terminal reflected faintly against the tired brown leather of his flight bag. Captain Marcus Hale. She kept thinking about the name stitched there. The life that existed before night shifts and maintenance bays and grease-stained jackets. "Were you serious back there?" she asked suddenly. Marcus blinked once. "About what?" She crossed her arms lightly against the cold breeze. "When I said I would marry you if you got us here alive." Marcus stared at her for exactly one heartbeat before a tired laugh escaped his chest. Low, warm, real. "No, ma'am," he said gently. "I was mostly focused on surviving the storm." Evelyn shook her head softly, smiling despite herself. "You really do not know how to flirt, do you?" Marcus adjusted the strap on his shoulder again. "Single fathers lose that skill around diaper number 4000. She laughed again, longer this time. One of her assistants waiting near the SUVs glanced over in visible confusion. People in Evelyn Carter's world rarely heard her laugh at all. Marcus noticed the assistant staring and lowered his voice slightly. "Careful," he said. "You keep smiling like that. Your board members might think you are happy." The sentence settled into her chest unexpectedly deep. Happy. She could not remember the last time someone used that word around her without attaching a stock price to it. A silence followed. Not awkward, just still. Marcus finally stepped backward toward the curb, where airport shuttles idled nearby. "I should get home before Noah starts telling his teacher his father disappeared into a lightning storm." Evelyn looked at him standing there beneath the pale New York sunrise. Calm, kind, entirely unimpressed by wealth. And for the first time in years, she realized how tired she was of people wanting things from her. Marcus Hale was the first person she had met in a long time who simply wanted to get home to his son. The apartment smelled like butter, maple syrup, and burnt toast by the time the sun fully climbed over Brooklyn. Morning light spilled softly through the kitchen blinds, painting thin gold lines across the tiny apartment walls, while an old jazz station played quietly from a radio near the sink. Marcus Hale stood barefoot at the stove, flipping pancakes one-handed while still wearing the gray thermal shirt he had fallen asleep in barely 3 hours earlier. Exhaustion sat heavy in his shoulders now that the adrenaline from the storm was gone, but the sound of Noah laughing at the kitchen table made tiredness feel smaller somehow. "Dad?" Noah said seriously while holding up a pancake shaped vaguely like Texas. "This one looks haunted." Marcus glanced over. "That pancake worked hard for this family. Show some respect." Noah laughed loudly, nearly knocking over his orange juice. The sound filled the apartment in a way expensive houses never seemed to manage. On the refrigerator beside them hung school drawings, overdue electric bills, and a crooked photograph of Noah sitting inside an old airplane cockpit wearing oversized headphones and the proudest smile on earth. Marcus looked at the photo for half a second while setting another pancake onto a chipped blue plate. Then came the knock at the door. 3 soft taps. Not hurried, not aggressive, just careful. Marcus frowned slightly. Nobody visited this early except landlords and bad news. Noah hopped off his chair immediately. I got it. Slow down, Marcus warned while wiping syrup from his hands with a kitchen towel. Noah already reached the door before he finished the sentence. The apartment hallway outside glowed pale from the morning sun spilling through the stairwell windows. Then Noah froze. Completely. His eyes widened so dramatically, Marcus almost laughed. Dad, Noah whispered loudly. There is a rich lady here. Marcus blinked once and walked toward the doorway, still holding the towel in one hand. Then he stopped too. Evelyn Carter stood quietly outside the apartment, wearing a cream-colored sweater beneath a dark wool coat, her blonde hair tied loosely back instead of perfectly styled for cameras and boardrooms. In one hand, she held a small paper bakery box tied with red string. In the other rested a model airplane kit still wrapped in store plastic. No assistants, no security, no black SUVs. Just her standing awkwardly in the hallway of a modest Brooklyn apartment building at 7:15 in the morning, looking strangely uncertain for someone who controlled billion-dollar negotiations before breakfast. Noah looked between them with open fascination. Dad, he whispered again, much less quietly this time. Is that your girlfriend? Marcus nearly choked, on absolutely nothing. Evelyn pressed her lips together, trying not to laugh. Good morning to you too, she said softly. Noah pointed directly at the airplane kit. Is that for me? Evelyn nodded carefully. I was told there lives a young aviation expert in this apartment. Noah immediately took the box from her hands like she had just handed him the moon itself. Marcus stared at Evelyn for a long second. You flew across the country, survived a thunderstorm, and tracked down my apartment before sunrise, he said slowly. That is either very thoughtful or deeply concerning behavior. Evelyn smiled faintly. I brought pastries. That usually lowers the creepiness level. Noah already ran back toward the kitchen table, clutching the airplane kit to his chest. Dad, can she stay for breakfast? Marcus looked at his son. Then at Evelyn, standing in the hallway beneath the soft morning light with city noise humming faintly outside the building windows. She suddenly looked nothing like the woman from the runway in Dallas. No armor, no performance. Just tired eyes and quiet hope wrapped inside expensive clothes. Marcus stepped aside from the doorway. Only if you are okay with haunted pancakes, he said. Evelyn looked at him for a moment before smiling softly. Real this time. After last night, she replied. I think I can survive anything.